Good morning. This is Getting to Know Your Beat. Our presenter today is Chris Harvey of the Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland. And Chris has worked as the digital editor for the Washington Post. She's been a magazine managing editor, a political reporter, and now a journalism teacher. So she has a wide swath of experience. She's directed the student-staffed Capitol News Service bureaus in Annapolis and Washington, and launched and directed the Multimedia News Bureau in College Park. She currently serves as Director of Assessments, which helps to oversee curriculum development and oversees a weekend Graduate Multimedia Certificate Program and teaches courses in reporting and editing. And today she is going to share the inside tips on how to get to know a beat when you're plunked down in the middle of a place you have not really contemplated before. So Chris, take it away.
Okay. Well, it's really nice to see all of you from so many different schools. So that's terrific. And it's nice to see Tom, who also had taught here at Maryland for quite a while with us. Good to see you again, Tom. A lot of students really loved your classes. So today I'm going to talk about two different areas, one of which is just what the heck do you do to prepare? I know some of you are starting maybe next week, maybe tomorrow, really soon at these internships. And how do you get ready so that you can hit the ground running? And I know that some of your other sessions will stress different parts of this later today. And I also wanted to quickly just run through a little bit with power searching again, because part of getting ready is doing research. And some of you might have had bits of this in your classes, but I want to make sure you know some tools that can help you to acquaint yourselves with information that you might need when you're out there reporting. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and see if I can pull up some information here. Can you guys see a little thing that says MDDC workshop?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, I want to just talk about getting ready, and hopefully maybe you've thought about this a little bit, but maybe not fully thought it out. How do you get ready before you even get to your newsroom? And honestly, I'll say to you what I say. I teach beat reporting classes here at Maryland still. I just finished one with a graduate group of students. And doing some reading ahead of time really matters, right? So you want to start, if you haven't been looking at the publication you're going to work for, I'd urge you now to start reading what stories are running on the homepage or the sports section or the business section, whichever area you're hoping to be working on this summer. And then go backwards. If you see a big story that was played splashy on the front of one of the sections you're going to be writing for on the homepage, do some searches back. What were the earlier stories over the last few months that might have been threads along the way for that story? You want to have a sense of the kinds of stories that matter to your publication. And they're all going to be different, right? If you're in Baltimore at the Baltimore Sun, your audience is going to be different than if you're at the Daily Record in Baltimore. And if you're at one of the Delaware publications, the same things. Each of these places, some of them are general audiences, some of them are very sort of niche audiences. Who are you going to be writing for, and what kind of stories is your publication following up on a lot? You want to come in with this information so that you know that there are some stories that you might suggest from, if you read a story now that you had a lot of questions on, or you thought, I wonder why they didn't talk to so-and-so, or I wouldn't wonder why they didn't pursue this other angle. Jot those things down, because your editors are going to be really impressed if they get a sense that you've been reading up and that you have questions or ideas for some of the stories that you saw. So that little bit of work can go a long way. Also look at some of the competition. So yeah, if you're going to be at the Baltimore Sun or the Daily Record, you might want to be skimming through the Post too, the Washington Post. You know, what's the competition for the publication that you're writing for, and what stories have they run as well? Think about national stories, guys. You've all, I'm sure, been watching some network news, seeing things on social media. What are some of the big stories right now that have a national or international angle that perhaps a local publication could take a piece of that and do some stories? Can you think of anything in the last few months that have just been all over the news? What stories have been big internationally or nationally? Anybody want to jump in?
Yes, Russian invasion in Ukraine spent a ton of local angles back in the U.S.
Yeah. So is there anything that you think should have been covered that wasn't by some of your local publications, perhaps even on campus?
I could talk about campus, just like we at the student newspaper, and I was not super involved in this, but I can say that they did not do a particularly good job of finding like a like a Ukrainian student to think like kind of what's this been like talking to their family back home or something. I don't know if that existed, but I'm assuming at Indiana there must have been someone, and they never really did that.
And what about, so I'm going to play devil's advocate. What about, there are a lot of Russian adopted children in this country, right? How are they feeling right now, right? Sometimes there are angles that we're all thinking of the horrors from the Russian invasion, but there are other people that have been hit and victimized that might be sort of folks that haven't been as prominent in the stories now. So think of some angles that you could pull off from those bigger stories that might be interesting in your local community. How would you track down something like that? How would you find in your community, members of the Ukrainian community or members of Russians who have immigrated here? How would you find them to do stories on them? What would you do? Who might know about where some of these folks are? Because that's what you got to put on your thinking cap and think, how would I, how do I do that if I'm interested in that? I'll throw out one easy way is sometimes there are very specific churches. I know in the Washington area, in Silver Spring, there's a road, New Hampshire Avenue, that goes up towards, goes north, and there are miles of all kinds of churches, and they're Orthodox churches, I think both Russian and Ukrainian. And so if you're looking for a community, sometimes it's as simple as that, as a gathering place, a community center, or a church where or a synagogue, or community where these people gather on the weekends. But so yeah, there are probably a lot of Russian and Ukrainian stories that we could do that haven't been covered, at least about your community, from the national or international angles. I don't know how many of you drive a lot, but I drive a lot every day to get to work now. And what about the impacts of inflation? Some of you mentioned business reporting this summer, right? So your publications have probably done quite a bit with rising costs of lots of things. But read through those stories and see, are there things that strike you as someone of maybe of a different generation than your bosses? What's missing from the stories that have been covered so far? But that's a giant global story right now for a lot of reasons. And think about it from your perspective, your angle. You all have very interesting backgrounds that might prompt you to think of different stories that haven't already been published. The same with, for years now, there have been, especially since 2020 and George Floyd's murder, there have been a lot of stories about police and community interactions, right, and hate crimes. And certainly last weekend we had another horror story in New York with hate crimes and violence. What about your community, right? I know in Maryland, in the state legislature, there was a measure passed requiring local jurisdictions to set up oversight boards for police allegations of police misconduct. Has that been done in your county? I know one of my students this semester wrote one about what just happened in Montgomery County here in Maryland. What about in the jurisdiction that you're going to be covering? Are there ongoing efforts to provide more sometimes citizen oversight of allegations of police misconduct? Right. So those are all questions. Like, I always have a lot of questions when I think of these topics and read the news. Can you think of other questions from your perspective, stories that you might want to address that have to do with, police and community interactions? What's been missing from stuff you've seen? Anyone? So it might take a little more thought, but those are huge stories that have had national impact, and it's something that you might want to address when you are in your communities this summer, your publication. So yeah, you're going to be looking and thinking about from the information you read, what what might you address? And then you want to jot ideas down and pitch them to your assignment editor, because you might have missed it. They might have already done it, or your assignment editor might have a spin that makes it even more interesting. They might add to your thoughts and add to the conversation and help you with sourcing, and point you in a really good direction for your story. So brainstorming is a really important part of, after you've done some reading, talking to folks in the newsroom when you get there, and pulling the thread on your idea to see how it could be made really interesting. One thing that I strongly recommend, first of all, ask when you get there if folks either on the general assignment beat, or if you're on police or business, whatever you're going to be covering features, are there running beat lists in your newsroom? A lot of newsrooms I've worked in had beat lists. When one reporter left and a new reporter came in, often they'd share or hand off a beat list. Ask about it. If there's not, when you're doing all this reading, when you're looking through the publications that, the stories that your publication's written, start making a list of people that come up repeatedly in stories. In my beat reporting class, we spreadsheet. We pull out either a Google sheet or an Excel spreadsheet, and I have them, running across the top columns. You'd have the person's last name, first name, title, what's their email address, what's their phone number, what's their Twitter handle. And those lists, I check them at the beginning of the semester and the end, and you might start one at the beginning of your summer and look at it again at the end of the summer and see what you've done. It's actually should be really gratifying if you keep track of things, to see, look at all the people I spoke to, look at all the new contacts I've made, some of which might end up being valuable to you in future jobs. Or if you're lucky enough and your publication asks you to come back again in another summer or for a job. These source lists are never waste. I can tell you, different publications, in the olden days, we'd have it on a Rolodex, and that would be silly now with everything digital, but having these spreadsheets that you can then save on a Google Drive and keep with you, as you move through different jobs, you'll find that they become very valuable. The other thing to keep track of, I actually asked my students to add 2 other columns to their source lists. And one was just preferred, either gender given at birth, or gender now, preferred gender. So do your sources want to be called he, she, or they, right? Also jot down when you're talking to people, say, I'm keeping track of this because I want to see how diverse the people I'm covering are. I asked my students to jot down if they could just race and ethnicity of all the people they talk to. Because at the end of the summer, or the end of the time that you're at this publication, if you see you're always talking to the same kind of source, the same kind of person, it's a wake-up call that you need to broaden the kinds of people you talk to. So it might seem a little, I don't know, a little odd at first to be keeping track of this, but I think it's actually a good thing to reflect on midway through and at the end of your semester, to see, do I always go for, the old white man who heads the committee in the State House or in the Capitol or in the county commissioners meetings? Or am I talking to citizen activists and younger people and older people, different kinds of people from different walks of life? Because depending on your story, some stories might not be, in some stories it might not be as valuable to have this wide swath of people, but certainly other stories would really lend themselves to having different voices. So you do want to keep a little track of yourself and who you go to see if you can do a better job with sourcing. So I want you to really, I think the tendency now, everything is so easy on our computers. It's so easy to find things. It's so easy with our phones or our laptops to send out messages, send out texts, look things up, go to Google. And I'm going to talk about Google in a bit, but there's no replacement for getting around in a community. And so if you're shy, I got to tell you, when I was a student, I actually went to Maryland for my undergrad degree. I was kind of a quiet nerd when I was young. And I had to really push myself to get out and talk to people. It was intimidating. But the bottom line is, you guys are all smart and curious people. And if you're shy, just remind yourselves, you're smart, you're well-read, you prepare before you go talk to somebody. Get up the courage, think of yourself, I'm on the job, I need to go talk to people. And the more you do it, the more you realize you're plenty smart, you're plenty knowledgeable. You're going to know as much as you need to know when you go talk to people if you've done a bit of research. So get out, go drive around, start talking to people. Start talking to people when you stop in at the stores, right? When you stop to get gas. Look at what you're seeing. Are there problems in the community? Are there a lot of homes for sale? Are some of them boarded up? You know, why? What's happening? Jot down notes if you're seeing something like that. Are there a lot of homeless people on certain corners? What's being done with that? You know, why? Make a note of it. Take a picture even. Sometimes when I'm running around, I'll just snap some photos with my phone just so that I remember where I was and what I saw. So it might spark something for a story. It might spark even a sentence or two in a story that you write if you've got some visuals on your phone. But look and jot notes down about what you're seeing. Ask yourself things about what you're seeing. Talk to people about what you're seeing, because all those observations lead to stories. And the more you get out and about and talk to people, the richer your story selection is going to be. So there are lots of, beyond looking and getting out and talking to people, there are lots of really helpful government sites and business sites that can enrich your reporting. If you just remember to look things up once in a while to give some nuggets, some context to the information you're writing in a quick story. So I did want to just remind you about some sites that have some really rich information. How many of you have used the Census Bureau site just for background on a community and the story in the past? Have any of you? Anybody yet? Okay, so let me see if I can still continue to show if I click on this live link here. I'm actually going to go to the Census Bureau has a site called Quick Facts. Can you see this census page, or are you still seeing my PowerPoint?
We can see it.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so this was just a page. I went to the Census Bureau site and did a search for the Quick Facts. And then in one of their boxes, I jotted down here that I wanted to see information for Baltimore. So if I'm coming into a city where I've never worked before, I kind of want to see, how does that city compare to Maryland? How does it compare to the US, the country? You know, what information is quick and handy here that would help me to get a sense of a community? And some of you mentioned that you're going to be reporting for different publications in Baltimore. Let's just take a quick scroll down this page and see what's here. So they've got population estimates for last summer, and you can see actually the Baltimore one, they don't have it. The last census information they had was from 2020, but that still gives you a good idea of, you know, we're talking, it's a little less than 600,000 people in the city compared to 6 million in the state, and a whole lot more in the US, right? 331 million. Okay, so that number itself isn't, in isolation, isn't that interesting, but if you went back 10 years to see what the figures were for 2010, you'd have some context. Is the city growing or is it losing population? And that always makes me think, why? You know, why either? Start comparing other demographics, right? So anything strike you just from the ages here in the comparing Baltimore with Maryland and the US? Any differences? Anything unusual jump out? They're not too radically different here. Let's start comparing origin, race, and origin. So in Baltimore, percent white is under 30%. In Maryland, it's about 59% white. In the US, about 76%. So as far as race, you'll see some differences there right away, right? So interest in the community that you're covering might be different than in another spot in Frederick or in Western Maryland. Keep that in mind. 62% Black or African American in Baltimore compared to 31% in the state and 13% in the country. So again, knowing the demographics of the community, that the interests in certain topics might be different than it would be in a community that skews differently. Housing, it talks about, you know, the value of housing units. And so what's the median value of owner occupied housing? It's much less in Baltimore than it is in the state. And the country lags the state. The state's wealthier overall with the housing units than the US. Look for median income, right? Median rents. How expensive is it to get an apartment in the city? So the apartments are a little more reasonable in Baltimore than they are in Maryland. They've got all kinds of information. I won't spend too long, but it's here for the picking, right? It gives you a sense of what your community is like. You know, who's got how many, what percentage of the population has a bachelor's degree? What percentage, what do we have here? Healthcare, you know, what about manufacturing, retail sales, transportation? How long does it take to get to work in Baltimore? It's about a little over a half hour, and that's not too different from the state and from the US numbers there. Median household incomes in Baltimore is much less than for the state. So that's something to keep in mind, right? So all these figures alone aren't a story, but when you go out, if you're reporting something about income or poverty, or even just racial demographics or age of the population, do be aware that the census has some really good information, and you can search by city, town, zip code, and find stuff that might be relevant to your story. All right. I just have to get back to my slideshow here. Where the heck? Okay, I'm going to go all the way back. All right, so we talked about census. And again, I think I was mentioning when you look at 1 year, it's a year in isolation, but more interesting often is to compare 5 years, 10 years earlier. How do those numbers for income, for population, for different demographics compare to earlier, and why? What's causing changes in trend lines? So in Maryland, I just wanted to draw your attention to, obviously you can search for the governor's site, or you could search for the Maryland legislative site, but there is a book called the Maryland Manual that compiles information. State Archives compiles it. And so you can find information about the governor, the governor's cabinet, the General Assembly, members of Congress, and even the courts in this book. And so if you haven't looked through it before, I'd urge you to take a little spin through it and see some of the information. I think I've got some links here. So yeah, you can see at a glance, you can find information about the state, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and a lot of information in between. It was a valuable resource on paper. It's more valuable now that it's searchable. There's information here within this manual also about the court system. But do be aware that there are online sites for all levels of the court systems. The information that you can find online for the district courts, the circuit courts, the Court of Appeals often isn't as rich as what you could find in the physical courthouse. The paper files have more information in them, but there's certainly a huge starting point, and they can, especially, I was at the district courthouse in Prince George's County about 3 weeks ago, and you can find out the night before what's coming up in the 6 courtrooms there, specific cases that are coming up, and the defendants' names. So they're searchable, they're online, and if you have the name of somebody who's up for a trial, you can find information just by searching through the court sites. So keep that in mind. You don't always have to immediately run to the physical building. You can start with an online search before you go to the physical building. How many of you know who your elected officials are? So I put a link, and I actually put these little PowerPoints into your Zoom, the chat area there for some uploads. But you can, if you're not sure, most states have a site, a page like this where, like, who the heck, you know, I just moved here, who are my elected officials? And I actually just moved a few months ago to Columbia, Maryland, from down here near College Park. So yeah, who the heck are my elected officials? These little sites are handy. You can find everybody. Hopefully you know who the governor of your state is, but you can also find your US senators, your specific congressional district representative, your state senators, your state delegates, and on down. And that can be pretty valuable if you're told to give a call to somebody to check on your congressman for a story. And you're like, crap, who is the congressman? What district are we in here, right? So you can quickly acquaint yourself with some of that information, so you don't feel as if you're at sea when you're asked to do something along those lines. When are the primary elections in the state you're going to be reporting for? So who among you is going to be at a Maryland publication? When's the primary here? We're in an election cycle right now. Does anybody know when the primary election is?
July
Is it
19th.
in June?
It was going to be in June, and was it Christine who just said July 19th? Christine, you're right. It was initially scheduled to be in June. Why was it bumped back in Maryland? That's good to know too. Why did they bump the date back for the primary?
The redistricting map got overturned by the Court of Appeals, so they passed a new one.
That's excellent. Yep. There were fights over every 10 years based on population figures. They redraw the district lines for elected officials. And pretty much every time they're redrawn, there are fights about it. One party says the party that's in power didn't do it fairly, right? And the fights here erupted into lawsuits, and those lawsuits made their way all the way up to the Court of Appeals. And Maryland had to scurry, and because the boundary lines were in flux, they had to push back the primary deadline to mid-July, July 19th. If you're going to Delaware, you might want to check and see what are the dates for the primary, what are the dates for the general, who's running, right? And so I did pull up some info here from, here we go. Not only can you find out who's running, but oftentimes you want to, if you're writing a story about a campaign, you want to say, this district, you know, who votes in the district? What's the demographics for the districts? How do they skew? And what's nice about, this is from the state Board of Elections site in Maryland. So if you see at the top, and I had just clicked, I think I clicked on elections and came down, and there's a page that talks about registration numbers, party registration. And so we're in May, but they have numbers all the way through April, which is pretty awesome. And it tells you how registration in this state skews. So I have to scroll down. They've got pages here, but this is active registration by county. So no matter where you're going in Maryland, you can figure out. And they tell you, you know, Democratic registration, Republican, Green Party, Libertarian, unaffiliated, other. It's a lot of information. Can you see this well enough to eyeball and say, who's got more registration in the state? Can you see the tallies here at the bottom? This is the Democratic and this is the Republican cell.
I can see it.
Okay, so are there more registered Democrats or are there more registered Republicans?
More registered Democrats.
Yeah.
Wow,
So,
wow. Yeah.
so this is how old I am. When I first was a reporter in Maryland, I was working in the 80s. The party registration here used to skew like 3-to-1 Democratic. I'd always, you know, that would be a sentence, a nut graph, and a story. It's different now. It's more than 2-to-1, but it's certainly not 3-to-1 anymore. But that's valuable information, but it's not consistent, right? So where do you think more Democrats are in this state of Maryland? Those of you who've been living or working here in the last couple of years.
In Baltimore.
Baltimore has a really strong, Baltimore City, strong Democrat. Where else?
Montgomery County, the Washington, D.C. suburbs.
Georges County.
Yeah, so PG, Baltimore City. where are some of the areas where voter registration is lopsidedly Republican? Because we have counties and jurisdictions that way too. If you just skim down here, you'll see, so Calvert County has more Republicans than Democrats. Typically, they're more in Western Maryland, Eastern Shore, Southern Maryland, right? And the communities that are a little closer into to DC have more Democratic registration typically. It helps you to put things in perspective when you're covering stories to know, okay, well, how are people mostly voting? You can also just look, let me see if I had it. On the site, you can go and see historical information, right? So this is valuable. So in the 2016 presidential election, who won that one? Do you remember, guys? 2016? Who came into power then?
I think Hillary Clinton would have won Maryland in 2016. I think that might be.
He won Maryland. That's right. And who won the U.S.?
Trump.
Yeah. So it's, you know, so sometimes the person who wins the national seat isn't the person who carries your state. And that's right. If you had gone here and looked in 2016, you get the breakdown and you can see who carried what here, that Hillary Clinton had about 616,000 votes to Trump's 229 or 230,000. So even though he won nationally in Maryland, the vote definitely went Democratic, and so it's considered a blue state, right? The overwhelming vote there went blue. But that's good to know too, because there have been, who's the governor here now?
A Republican, Larry Hogan.
Yeah, Larry Hogan's currently, so there have been a number of Republican governors so elected statewide. He ran a really smart campaign twice and has held on to his power, but now he's got to leave office because we have restrictions on 2 terms for the governors here. And so this election in July and in November is going to be interesting, right? To see who now comes into power in Maryland for the governor's seat. Will the Republicans hold on, or will the Democrats take it back? So maybe if you're lucky, those are kind of, for me, those are really fun stories. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll be able to get a little piece of some of these election stories. Even the local races, honestly, can be very fun. And so do know that you're, actually, they can get really, really fun, right? Because those commissioners and county council and county executive seats are important. So there are also boards of elections for the counties, and you can look up information. So do be aware that if you're talking to somebody for an election story, you can put data with it and enrich that story. Rebecca and I were talking before we started today, and she mentioned that the MDDC has some really rich information they've collected in the past on census and on campaign finance. So depending on what seat a person's running for, if it's a federal seat or a state seat or a local seat, they have to keep track of who they get money from for their race and who they how they spend it. And so those databases can be looked up online too, and you can get really interesting story on, you know, where's the money coming from and where's it going in a campaign. Our students in the past, some of my students in our Capitol News Service Bureau, one time, one of my students, when Senator Mikulski was still in office in Maryland, was doing some searches and just found that she was spending a lot of money on flowers, campaign money. And I remember saying, is that allowed? Like, can she do that? Like, she spent a whole bunch. So who would we talk to if we wanted to do a story about what the heck, why is Senator Mikulski spending money on flowers? Who would we talk to for that?
I'm not sure if the documents you had tracked this far back, but like, could you track where she was buying the flowers from?
Well, we could. So we talked to her staff, and first we talked to her press secretary, and then the press secretary allowed us to talk to her, which is the more desirable thing with this. And they said, well, when we find out about some folks in our district who have passed away, we sometimes send flowers to the family. And again, I said to the reporter, is that allowed? You know, are there restrictions on spending money for flowers? And we found out it was perfectly legal. It was a legal use for campaign funds, but we thought voters might be interested in it. We ended up doing a story on how she was spending some of her campaign money. So I'm mentioning this just because sometimes the stories aren't dry. Sometimes they get to be quite interesting. There was a story not too long ago, I think it was Senator Schumer, spent a lot of money on cakes. And one of the national reporters, like, why are you spending all this money on cakes? And again, it was for events, but he made a joke at one of his press conferences in Washington about, you know, I really love cheesecake, so we buy a lot of it. But it was another, you know, why are you spending campaign money? How's it being spent? And sometimes the stories even lend themselves to jokes, so they can be fun. But so on these election sites, you can get full lists of who's running as well, which is valuable for when you're doing these stories. Before we go getting beyond, the other thing just to remember, there are a lot of really rich government sites. I'm going to stop the share for just a minute. Can you think of other databases from federal officials that you've looked through that were really useful for some of your stories? Anyone used any yet? I think for those students who've been at Maryland, think about your Journalism 201 class. Did you guys look through FBI data for crime? Hopefully you did. Normally in our first reporting class, students look through FBI uniform crime reporting data. And police jurisdictions from all over the country are required to regularly give information on violent crimes, statistics on it. So, you know, rapes, murders, robberies, burglaries. And you can track it through time, trend lines, and just to see what's nice even about some campuses, the campus police departments make that data available in tables, and we often write stories about what's happening right on campus because we've got access to this uniform crime reporting data from the FBI. You know, some of the bigger crimes on campus are often thefts, and thefts of things like laptops and bikes that are left out and forgotten, and students come back and they've been taken. But it's often interesting to look at crime trends for a community to see how they changed in the last 5 years. And if crime's going up, what are the police departments doing to try to combat crime, right? So that's another really good one to check for. So some of these pockets of information are like, okay, I know this is here, I'm going to go look for it, but hopefully you're also ready and able to do smart searches, just sort of more free form searches. And so I wanted to just talk to you. I know everybody's familiar with Google, but sometimes you're not as familiar with some of the advanced tools on Google. So let me just, I'm going to look real quick on my desktop and I'm going to share something again here real quick. Okay. I have a little PowerPoint here on advanced search. So I'm going to share my screen with this. Whoops, that was the other one. Can you see the power searching with Google? Everybody? I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So, you know, the key is to just to have all the antenna going up when you do Google searches, just as you would if you were handed information by a source. I think sometimes we let our guard down. We're doing searches, we see something on a page and we're like, oh, that is really interesting information. The problem is some people think it's really funny to put spoof information up and to see, literally to see if reporters will fall for it and print it. This existed even before the internet. There used to be people who'd have hoax press conferences to see what reporters would fall for their junk information. But it's a lot more, it's more easily spread now that things are so available online. So please, when you're surfing, have your antenna up so that you're wary of information that you're looking at. one easy, quick thing to do is to do a search on what's called the domain name. And the domain is just the URL, the web address through the first single slash. We'll come back to that in a minute. The other thing that you can do is just to do a who is search. Can you, on your own screens, can you kind of push me to the side there? Does everybody know how to do that in Zoom? If you go up to the top, actually, I'm just going to stop my share for a minute so you can do a free form search. Let me just stop. And in your, go ahead and double click on a browser if you've got one on your desktop, hopefully. And I'm going to ask you to do a search with me right now. Is everybody getting a browser up?
Yep.
So the URL that I want you to put into your browser is whois.com/whois. So whois.com/whois. So it's a whois domain lookup. Can you nod if you found that page? Thank you. All right, now go ahead. This is going to not seem like, oh, this is ridiculous that she's making a search, but I want you to see what comes up on the page when you search. Go ahead and type in, I think you know probably who publishes the Washington Post, but type in washingtonpost.com. And I think I will go ahead and share the screen I just got real quick. Or can you see what came up for you? I'll just scroll down mine and then I'll share just in case you got something different. So what's it telling you here? This is actually a registration site. If you want to have a spot on the internet, you have to register your domain with one of these internet companies. GoDaddy is one of the ones where you can buy space to launch a site. But it's collected, and whois is compiling the information to tell you, who launched a site. So what does it says registered on? What does that tell you, the registered on information? Anybody want to venture a guess?
It's like the date that the site was registered or launched, or maybe the right verb be.
Yeah. So this is literally the Washington Post website. And this might seem really old to you, but it feels not old at all to me because I'm older. They didn't think to register their website until 1995. Before that, they had a paid service online called AT&T Interchange, and you had to pay for it to have information come to your computer through phone lines. In 1995, they started to think, oh, this whole internet thing might be something that we want to get a part of. And so they registered a domain name, WashingtonPost.com, in November of 95, and actually didn't launch on the web. It took some time to build it up. And in the summer of 1996, I was actually there working at the Post during their launch. They launched their presence on the internet. And this tells you that their current site's going to expire again in 2022, and they're going to have to re-up and pay some more money to keep maintaining this site. Most major sites actually launched around the same time, which, it wasn't all that long ago in the lifetime of your parents that these all finally went on the web. So USA Today, the Baltimore Sun, the Post all launched in that whole 95, 96 era. More importantly, besides when they launched, is the information. If you scroll a little lower on the page, what else does it tell you about the owner of this site? Anybody? Should I share? Do you want me to share what I've got? Let me share real quick. All right, so this is pretty important stuff. So the Post is obvious, right? We know, most of us would know what NewYorkTimes.com or NYTimes.com or WashingtonPost.com, what it is, but sometimes the URL isn't as obvious. And so knowing that you can go to this whois lookup and find information, this tells you where they physically live, right? They used to be on 15th Street, now they're on 13th Street. It gives you a main phone number for the Washington Post. It gives you a fax number. I know those aren't used as much anymore, but it's a way to contact people there. And those that's important if you're tracking down somebody for a story and you want to make sure that you can reach them. You know, is this who it purports to be? Can I call them? Can I see who this is? So there's a little more all the way down here. I'm just scrolling down. A few more, there's the email contact, the tech contact. So if the URL isn't obvious, you can do a who is lookup to find out who launched the site. And can I contact them about the information? So I do think that's good for you to know. Okay, let me pull up this other screen here. I knew that I'd end up going back and forth a little bit today. All right, when you're looking at URLs, it is important, at least as a sort of a quick look, what does it end in, right? What's the end of the domain name there? What does a .gov site tell you about that site? What information do you get by seeing .gov in the web address?
That it's from the government.
Government rank.
Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, so I'm not sure who just said that.
I
Whoever
think
said
the tag team did. I don't know who else that was though.
All right, excellent. Well, the tag team worked. It's initially was intended as federal government, but I know some state and local governments carry that piece of the web address as well. The important thing is that you and I can't buy that domain name. It's only government agencies that can buy that domain name. And so while we might always have a healthy skepticism about some information that comes from the government, you do know it would be analogous to us going to a press conference and having a piece of paper from that government official handed to you. It's not going to be me or you publishing on the .gov site. So it's fairly reliable as far as knowing who put that information out there. What about a .mil? Who has access to publishing on .mil?
Military.
Yeah, U.S. military, right? So it's Pentagon sites, sites run, you know, Army, Navy, those, the branches of the military. Those are folks who can publish to a .mil site. So again, it's not the general public. You might not always trust information from the military. You might have some skepticism, but it's analogous to getting that information by phone or on a piece of paper from those departments. What about .edu? Who uses that domain?
Universities or
Fictional.
schools.
Yeah, so it was initially intended for 4 years, 4-year universities and colleges. Sometimes it's some other sort of post-secondary schools that have the .edu. If it's a .edu and it's attached to a library or a research center, it's probably pretty valuable, right? So if it was something by the archivist for one of the centers here at the University of Maryland with the .edu, if it's something from McKeldin Library with the .edu, it would be similar to getting information there physically. What you have to remember though is oftentimes at .edu, students and teachers have access to publishing on those platforms. And so let's say I wanted to publish something and I had access to the College of Journalism server. You know, hopefully I'd be publishing information that had to do with journalism, for which that's my background, right? That it might be credible information. But there have been instances, you know, let's say I just said, I want to put something up about fox terriers because I love those dogs, right? So I wouldn't be a very credible source about dogs. I have no background other than having one and liking them. So you still have to be a little bit wary when you see this. Look to see further who's actually, is it a scholar? Is it somebody who's got the expertise in that field, that area, who's putting out the information? What about this other row, the .com, .net, .org? Who can oops, I just merged 2 rows in one. Who can publish to .com, .net, .org?
Anybody?
Anybody. So that is correct. So .orgs were initially intended when they first came up for that, for a domain name. It was initially intended for nonprofits, right? And you do still see a lot of nonprofits with the .org part of the domain name. .coms were initially intended for businesses, .nets for, organizations within a business. But the reality is, if you went to GoDaddy.com and plunked down, I don't know if it's $30 now a year or how much it is to buy some server space, but it's not too much money. I could get chrisharvey.com if somebody hasn't already snapped it up. So you could be a .com, a .org, or a .net too. So do keep that in mind, that really doesn't tell you anything much about veracity. You'd have to drill further into the site. And the .int I don't see so much, but it's for international treaties. So you can find out some information from those domains. Hopefully you're all looking to see if the thing's riddled with typos and horrible blinking graphics and looks and sounds unprofessional, it probably was launched by an amateur. And so tread away from it. I wouldn't spend much time there. If you're looking for stuff for a news story and it's not updated regularly, go to another site. If you don't see the contact information and the About Us information on the homepage, there should be links if they're a credible site. Start to have some skepticism, and certainly look to see who's publishing it, who's writing for it, who's editing it. Many news sites now have reporter bios at the bottom of their stories. Certainly, you know that most news organizations, at least a lot of mainstream US organizations, are trying to be as fair as possible, but you do want to know something about the folks who are publishing to the site before you decide if you're going to believe it or not. I'm just going to skip past Wikipedia. Unlike high school teachers, I don't say don't look at Wikipedia. I do say go to the footnotes. You can look. I'll fess up, I often go to a Wikipedia site for a first look and say, oh, that's some interesting background information. Okay. And then I scroll down to the bottom of the page because why? What's down at the bottom of a Wikipedia page?
All the references that where the information was gotten from.
Yeah, so those footnotes can often link to primary sources. So in that respect, a Wikipedia page can take you to some good information. When I looked before coming in here, our alum page has one of my friends, Sue Copen-Katsev, who just retired from the University of Maryland a year or two ago, and she's listed on the Wikipedia alumni list, so that was fun to see. How many of you know about the Wayback Machine? All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and on your Google, on your browser, I want you to go type in and do a search for the Wayback Machine. And I'm going to do the same. And nod your head if at the top of your page you're seeing something that says Internet Archive Wayback Machine. Everybody good? All right, so what I want you to do is go ahead and type in, there's a search box that says enter a URL of words to search. Go ahead and type in CNN.com. And let's do a search. Do you see under the navigation bars there's a timeline that stretches on my screen from 1999 down to 2022. Go ahead into 2001 and go to September 11th. So scroll down in the calendar here and type and click on September 2011. And you'll see that there are about a dozen timestamps on that page. Just click on one of the timestamps. And it'll take a minute to come up, especially because we're all hitting on the same page. But I want you to see what comes up. Is yours still trying to load? Because mine is. Okay. I'll share what I got, and I'll be curious to see which stamp you hit, but let me share my screen real quick. So this is going to look ancient to you, right? This is from September 11th. Obviously, it was the day of the terrorist attacks in New York and Pennsylvania and Arlington, Virginia. But in mine, I clicked on the 4:33 p.m. Eastern time timestamp, and this is the archived homepage from CNN.com on that day. What strikes you about this? Just a couple things strike me. What's your gut reaction to this page?
I would say every single link is about the attacks. It's like a special report where they only focused on that one.
Yeah, so the whole homepage was nothing but this terror attack, and it was so shocking. It was such a shocking day. So a lot of things strike me because we're all used to seeing pages now, right, online that look very different. This front page, the navigation bar, where are we used to seeing the main navigation bar on a news site now? To click around the site, where do you go?
The top,
Yep. Where is it here?
the left side.
Yep. So when all these sites launched in the mid 90s or so, initially they figure people read left to right for print. They put the navigation bar on the left side, and that's where this was in 2011 as well. Later eye tracking studies showed a lot of movement left to right, but going from the top down. And so a lot of sites moved their bar up and had it go across the opening screen. The other thing that strikes me is how plain this is. It's plainer than it normally would have been in 2001, because it was such a shocking day, starting at early in the morning, 8:45 a.m. when the first plane hit one of the towers. Traffic exploded on, I know, the Washington Post site, CNN, New York Times, especially the New York and Washington sites. It was so, from all over the world, everybody was trying to get on these sites, and they crashed for a bit. And what happened is a lot of the web editors had to strip their pages, and the load times were slower then. It wasn't as instantaneous as you normally get when you have heavy images. They stripped out, a lot of them left, you see one image here, right? And then a lot of just stripped down links. No ads were on this page, and it was to allow a lot of people to hit it simultaneously and not have the site crash. But I like to show this just because what's the value of having this page come up? What's the value of seeing a timestamp, a little slice of history on a news site? How could this be used as a reporter or researcher? What could you do with this? I think these links are still live. At least I had gone to some sites. Some of these might not be. Yep. So this is what's really, so these story template pages look a lot different than now too. You don't see the ads all breaking up all the copy the way they do now. But you can actually get to some of these stories here that might be behind a paywall now, right? That you can get to it right by clicking on this site, so you can get original content. So if you were writing a research paper about the 9/11 attacks or coverage of the 9/11 attacks, this would be hugely valuable to see how sites like the USA Today and the New York Times and the Washington Post, CNN, how they covered it, and what kind of stories they had, and what the page looked like. And so sometimes too, just for background or nut graphs in a story, sometimes you want to go back into archives, and you can sometimes have easier access getting through it this way than you might going through a paywall. So I love the Wayback Machine, and I love actually looking at these snapshots of how pages used to look. I'm gonna stop that share and come back into my, got too many screens up now. Okie dokie. So Wayback Machine can be valuable for both reporting purposes and for research purposes. What about, how many of you have used Google Scholar? Have you heard of it? Anybody? Okay, Matt, you're shaking your head. Yes. What have you used it for?
Honestly, for research projects for school, I've actually never used it for a story. But I've used it for just academic papers.
Yeah. So sometimes, again, sometimes information's behind a paywall. If you're lucky, your library, if you're still at school, might have that, what used to be called LexisNexis. It's Nexus Uni now, that allows you to get into a lot of news publications that have paywalls and see stories that you might need for a story, either a story or for a research paper. Google Scholar is nice because it gives you stuff that you wouldn't normally think of, like not just newspapers, but scholarly journals and medical journals and information. One of my projects that a class of mine did was on athlete concussions, teenagers who had concussions from playing in sports. And we were looking through some medical journals and some publications that I don't normally frequent. And by going through Google Scholar, we were able to find this information. It was actually for a story project and not just a research paper. So I want you to go back into your browser and not just hear me talk about it, but actually see what it does. So go ahead in your browser and type in scholar.google.com, scholar.google.com. And I will do the same thing. And when you get there, do you see that the screen says there's a little button that says articles and one that says case law? When you click on case law, it tells you you can search federal courts, state courts, selected courts. So you can actually search for opinions in different courts through this Scholar. But let's say we just wanted to see articles written by or about someone. And I've got Brett Kavanaugh and some of the conservative members of the Supreme Court have been in the news lately. Go ahead in your search box there for articles, type in the name Brett, B-R-E-T-T, and then Kavanaugh is K-A-V-A-N-A-U-G-H. I'm going to do that and I'm going to share my screen, but you do it as well. So this was just a quick search in Scholar to see what comes up about by or about Brett Kavanaugh, one of the members of the justices on the Supreme Court. You know, you can scroll down and see if any of these fit. You could have written a lot more specific search. I just wanted to do it by name for a minute here. What I really like is all the other options it gives you under the little blurb that describes what's in the story or in the journal article. So why would cited by be an important line? These say, you know, this article's been cited by 452 people, so it's been mentioned in other research articles. What does that tell you about it?
It's really credible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
I think that when you see a lot of scholars citing an article, it says to me it's probably fairly credible or fairly interesting or fairly something that I might want to look through, right? The Citeline CITE is actually really valuable as well. If you're writing a research paper and you know what format your editor or teacher wants you to write it in, it tells you how to cite the notes, which is a time saver. And the other thing is, if you're doing research and you came up with specific articles, it tells you there's a related articles button that sends you to other stories on this topic. So it can really help to shortcut your research when you're using Scholar. So again, I especially for project work, it can be valuable and help you get around some of the paywalls that you might see in a more free-form search. I'm going to skip all the way down. I often talk about some of the little symbols you can type into just actually, let's look at one. So I'm going to stop sharing a minute. And if you use the minus symbol, I talk about it here. Can you see the screen again with info on the minus symbols? If you use a minus symbol when you're doing a free-form search in Google, it eliminates that from the returns. So I've got my brain on my dog again. Terrier dog breeds minus rat. So I want to see information on terriers, but not rat terriers. So I'm going to stop sharing. And in your browser, go ahead and type in terriers. And then leave a space minus rat and hit the return bar. My goodness. Did everybody have time to do that? So you're just doing a free-form Google search, terriers minus rat. So it's subtracting, it's giving you less than all the returns. And here's what I just got. So, you know, to sharpen your search, sometimes just subtracting information that you don't want helps you to get the returns you do. And you get a lot of cute dog pictures when you do this search. So that's one little command you can type in. Here, two other ones that I wanted you to be aware of. So things that help to narrow just a free-form search in Google. If you were typing a search, so obviously with the murder of George Floyd in 2020 and the stories about improprieties with police officers, a lot of people were searching for very specific information having to do with that. One of the gurus from Google comes regularly to our campus, and one of his bits of his knowledge transfers has stuck with me. My tendency before was always just to do the search, free-form search in Google and see what the algorithm pulls up to the top. He recommends if you want to have information from a specific site or a specific domain to include that in your search. So if I only wanted to see CNN stories about George Floyd, I would type in George Floyd space site : CNN.com. Now, why wouldn't I just go to CNN.com and type in George Floyd? Why would I go to a free-form search and type in site : CNN.com? Anybody know? Dan Russell, who's the guru of search at Google, said that actually their algorithm for finding information on CNN is stronger than the CNN algorithm for finding information on its own site. So it's more efficient to actually type in site : CNN.com to find that information than going to the homepage of CNN to find it, which I thought was fascinating. Likewise, you can search by domain. We talked about .gov, government sites being at least what they purport to be, right? They're the government officials giving you information about something that's got global or national interest. Let me stop sharing, and I want us to type in, I'm going to grab this so I don't have to retype it, but we're going to type in a free search, Vladimir Putin space site : .gov. Let me stop the share. So go ahead in your browser, in Google, type in Vladimir Putin space site : .gov. Before you do it, what do you think will come up first? What sites might come up first? Any guesses? Anybody? I would think maybe State Department, something like that. Let's hit and see what happens. So what was at the top of your search return when you did that? What comes up first for you guys?
I had a State Department website for Putin's historical disinformation, an article from May 6th.
Yep, I got the same thing on my screen. So state.gov, the State Department information on his disinformation. And the second one, which I was expecting to come up high as well, a White House site, a whitehouse.gov page on Putin and talking about Biden. Did you guys see that? Do you want me to show you what I got? Did everybody get similar information? I will go ahead and share that real quick, just in case you had trouble. Oops. Oops. Trying to move our little pictures out of the way. Okay, so here's what I got, and it was the State Department site came up first, followed by the whitehouse.gov site. A lot of White House, George Bush, White House archives, right? So if I was looking for really good information, sort of firsthand information, primary sources, searching in the .gov domain would be really smart. Rebecca, am I okay with a couple more minutes, or how am I doing? Or did I run over?
No, you're great on time. Theoretically, we're going to wrap up at 11:30 and then take a
Okay.
short break. But if you go over by a couple minutes, the world will still keep turning.
All right. Well, so those were just reminding you that even in a free form search, you can find information that's very specific, better than just saying Vladimir Putin, right? I'd get much more reliable information by adding the site .gov in there than I would have without that. Also good for you to know that there's an advanced search site within Google, right? Have many of you used that yet? Have you gone to advanced search? It's google.com advanced_search. Go ahead and type that into your search box right now, because this is really something you want to know about. If you can't remember the URL, just search for advanced search in a Google search box. And you should have gotten a page with a lot of little boxes to fill in, right? It says find pages with, and then you have lots of options in here. So I'm gonna type in, I'm going to put find pages with all these words, wire-haired terrier. Or you could have said any of these words and put wire-haired terrier to see what happens. What I want you to see are how cool it is, the boxes that are on the lower half of this page. You can search by language for that search phrase. You can go ahead. I'm going to put in English because sadly, it's the only one that I'm fluent in. If you would prefer another language, put it in. You can search by region here. So you can search, it pulls up a lot of different countries. I'm going to pull up, because it's a wire-haired terrier, and I know they're from the British Islands, I'm going to probably put in England and see what they have, or something. Let's see, maybe it says British, United Kingdom. Yep, I'm going to click on United Kingdom. It asks you last update, so you can specify is the past 24 hours, a week, month, year. I'm going to say the past year. I'm not going to be picky. Here's where you could restrict. Below that, you can restrict. Remember we said, do we want to look on .com or .gov when we do in the free search? You can restrict it here. I'm going to say .com for my dog search. And if you were looking just for photographs, let's say you were writing for a publication, a nonprofit or a student publication, and you wanted to be able to republish it, or even a commercial site. There's one of the last boxes there says usage rights, and it'll say free to use or share, period, no restrictions, free to use or share even commercially. So there are different options here, not filtered by license. I'm going to say free to use or share even commercially. And I'm going to click on the box that says advanced search. And it did not like my wire-haired terrier, so I'm going to simplify and just say terrier. And do it again. Okay. So I'll show you what came up for me, and you might have searched differently, but let me share what I just got. I got a lot of cute little dogs up here. I didn't restrict rat this time. I didn't do the minus rat or the restriction on rat, and it's giving me lots of dog pictures of different breeds. Little Jack Russells here. Obviously, that was a search for fun rather than a news story, but do be aware that you can cater that in different ways and use terms that would be very specific to your news stories. All right. So advanced search, going there, doing restrictions on the time frame, on the country, the language, really allows you to do some very specific things with your story. All right. I'm going to go back. Okay. I'll stop sharing for 1 minute. And I'll come back to the very end of this because we're almost out of time. I do want to show you some trend lines that come up here as well. Okay. So I'm going to share, actually, I'm going to give you a URL to type into your computer, onto your browser. Type in trends.google.com. And I'll show you what the page looks like in just a sec. So this is what I get up when I typed in trends.google.com. You can search by topic to see how many other people are searching for this, either worldwide or by country or a specific region. So again, let's say I was going to look up police brutality. And I actually, let me also type, well, oops, did I misspell? Let's start broader. What would happen if I had said, let's look here over the last 5 years? Do you see the trend line now? This is showing me just a couple of years, but I'm going to search back further. So I searched I simplified it just to police brutality. This is showing me searches for the US, in the US for this term over the past 5 years. Why is it flat, 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 spike, flat, flat, flat? What happened?
George Floyd.
Yeah. So this spike in searches and interest, George Floyd was murdered in May 2020. And you can see the interest here was huge. Sometimes you want to have a visual. Sometimes this helps you with your reporting to remember something or to see a trend, to see what was breaking at a certain time. This just I actually searched earlier today and I searched for a shorter time frame and then I went back 5 years and I was like, this is markedly different. And it really demonstrates the power of the visual. So it could inform your reporting, but it also could be used on a website. So the nice thing about these trend lines on Google is these little arrows here on either sort of mid-page, the left looks like less than and greater than symbols. If you click on that, if you are familiar with some HTML or CSS code, JavaScript here, this allows you to literally cut and paste. You could grab this coding that's here that comes up between the less than and greater than symbols in the code and copy it and paste it into your website, and you could reuse this trend line. So you'd have a free visual for your story to talk about interest or what was happening at that time. So it's and again, just as we were able to restrict in the advanced search sort of when we were looking what types of pages we wanted to bring up from where, you can restrict by region, you can restrict by certain times, you can restrict by categories of information. So there's a news button here. And it's pretty similar to what we saw earlier, or you could restrict it by images or news or YouTube. So it's really kind of a cool little plus within the Google search umbrella that I think if you're a very visual person, learn a lot by visual, think your audience would learn by visuals, it's nice to know about this. So I actually am going to stop right there and put a pin in it, but I hope some of these things, either the direct sites such as census or election sites, or even just knowing a few more terms for search when you're doing your research to familiarize yourself with the topic or your coverage area. I hope they help you a little bit before you get to your publication, because I want you to do some searches before you land, so that you land smart and you can offer some story ideas up to your editors. They'll think highly of you if you come in armed with some knowledge about their community. Okay, good luck, guys. For some of you, I think it might be the first time you're getting paid for your journalism. So yay. I'm really happy for you. I know that sometimes internships or experiences on your campuses weren't paid. So you're on your way when you start getting paid. You're on your way as a student reporter, but it's very gratifying to get a paycheck, isn't it? So congratulations, you're the chosen ones. Have a great summer.